Our names are Noah Ramos and Michael Zilversmith. The date is December 2nd, 2018, and the time is 10:39. We are at Congregation Beth in Phoenix, Arizona. We are so glad you have given us the opportunity to meet you and interview you.
Can I start with you?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay, as well as you know, tonight is the day of Hanukkah, of miracles and light. And I want you to know that you are looking at a miracle that has survived Nazi camps and extermination. If my story is a little bit too painful for you, tell me, okay?
Yes.
All right. I was 6 or 7 years old when the Nazis occupied us. We were a big family. My father came from 18 children. They didn't have a television then.
Was he the youngest or the oldest?
He was the youngest. Unfortunately, after the war, we didn't find anybody. They were all married with children and families, which in itself is a terrible thing. We were about 12, and we hid under the floor of one of the houses. My grandmother, I had 2 grandmothers. My grandmother said, "The Germans will not hurt me. I know them, and I'm a woman of God." So she was sitting and praying when the Germans came in while we were hiding under the floor. And they beat her up, and finally a German said, "She's too old to bother with, let's kill her." So they killed her right there. And then they gathered up all the Jews in our town and put them in an empty barn and start to burn them alive. The ones that tried to escape were killed. So the Jews went up in flames to heaven. But then they formed a ghetto from the Jews that hid or remained. And we lived in the ghetto at very minimal rations. And then they came in and they just shot everybody that was there. And people just ran away wherever they could. That's when I got separated with my parents and the siblings. And I came with my grandmother, another grandmother, and her son. We fled in one side, and the rest of them fled all over. We didn't know where or when. We wound up in the woods with hardly any clothing or anything, but we were there. I don't know if you heard of the partisans. No. They were soldiers that were captured by the Nazis and broke out of the jails and wound up in the woods. They were Russian soldiers. So they formed like a bunch of them, and they used to attack railroads and stuff like that in the German occupation. Everybody listening? Okay. So we were with them for 6 months. Then they suggested that some of the people that could afford, they would take across the border. I, with my grandmother and her son, were in the woods, and my grandmother had a wedding band. It was so thin, like a thread. So she said to the guy that was collecting money or gold or jewelry, "Take this ring, please, and save my granddaughter." And all I could remember, he said, "Forget it." The ring wasn't enough. So the people that did have money and gold mainly, and went with these people towards the front of the German to cross the border into Russia. As they came to the clearing of the forest, they were all killed by the Germans. Can you understand this?
Yes.
Okay. And therefore, us who had nothing remained safe. So you can understand how mysterious God works. That those that had nothing were left alive. Well, but afterwards, another group of these partisans were crossing the border, and they offered us help to cross into Russia. So as we were going towards the railroad, which was the border, I couldn't walk anymore. So one of the men said to me, "You hide under this bush. I'll come and get you later." I didn't think he would, and neither did anybody else, but I was small and thin, so he hid me under a big bush, and while I was laying there, the rest of them crossed the border. And here came the patrol, the German patrol, with a German shepherd. And I'm laying under the bush, and here comes the guard with the German shepherd. He couldn't see me in the bush, but the miracle of it was the dog didn't bark. Can anybody understand this? The miracle of it all? I lay at night thinking, how is it possible? It surely wasn't my knowledge at 7. Who decided for me to live? If anybody who doesn't believe in God has to say to himself, who else but God saved me? That the dog didn't even bark. He certainly smelled me. I was alive. I was there. Okay, the guard couldn't see me. I understand that. But the dog. So, and the man came back for me. After the guard left, he came for me. And I wound up in Russia with my grandmother. And my uncle was taken away by the Russian government. And then it was me and my old grandma in Russia. We lived in a barn, and my grandmother was sick. I went around begging for scraps of food for me and for my grandmother. At night I went, and a man saw me carrying water. He said, "Who let you out of the house in this late at night? come on, I'll help you to carry the water. And he saw, when he walked into our barn where we lived, he saw how my grandmother lay on the floor, covered with straw, and how I went in, and I said to him, "This is where we live." He stood in the door crying how terrible it was. And then he must have been some kind of person that was in charge. Because in the morning they came and they took my grandmother to the hospital, and me they put in a house to take care of 2 children. Now, I was 8 maybe by then, and the children was 4 and 2. And I had to cook and clean house and everything to watch over the children. And it went on like this for a while, and I used to go to visit my grandma in the hospital, but she was doing poorly all the time. And then she died, and they brought her to a cemetery, and they just dumped her there. Nobody was there to help me to dig a grave or anything. And after I dug the grave, I put my grandmother in, and they took me away to an orphanage. Being Jewish, I got twice the work, twice the stuff to do, and which I could never finish, and I got punished. You would think nowadays that I sit with you, how can it be possible, right? But they shaved off my head, and it was a known fact that here comes the Jewish kid. Every time I had to be called down to the office, and the lady in charge would always punish me with something to do, this and that. And then one day, I think I forgot to tell you, is when my grandmother was dying, she said to me, "Listen to me, you're among non-Jews. Remember, you are a Jewish child. And here's a piece of paper where you were born, and maybe somebody would be left alive. So, and promise me you will write every week a letter to this address." And so I did, like I promised my grandmother. And this one time, the supervisor of the orphanage called me downstairs, and she was smiling. For the first time in all the time, she was smiling. And I said to myself, "Gee, that's strange." And she sat me down and she said to me, "You know, your parents are alive. Can you imagine this after all this time?" My parents came home and they found a letter of mine. And they sent a passport and money to bring me home. So when I came home, my mother had saved a child, a little girl that her parents were killed. So she saved her and she brought her home to where we lived. And when I came home, after everything I went through, I felt like a stranger because we were so many years separated. But I started, to do things. And then they allowed the people that were born in Poland to move to Poland. So we did, and from there we went into Germany to be transported into America. My father had 2 brothers in Chicago. By then I was about 14 years old. And when we came to Chicago, I knew 5 languages: Hebrew, Jewish, Yiddish,
Yeah.
okay, and Russian and Polish. But I didn't know English, so what good it do me? So they put me in 1st or 2nd grade at age 14. Now, by height, I probably was the same height as the kids, but I lived through so much. So I used to cry every single day. And then a teacher, which I know is a wonderful woman somewhere, took 2 hours each Saturday to teach me English on her own, till I was ready to go to high school. Can you imagine this?
That little girl that your parents saved,
Yeah.
did she come with you?
No, the thing is, she found the aunt of hers in Poland, and the aunt took her in because her children were born. So, but we heard from her till she got married. She lived in New York and had a family of her own. And in America, I went to high school, I learned, I had a job. And one thing, we started over again. We didn't live in the past. We looked for a new life. And got married. I had a wonderful husband for 61 years. Okay?
What was the name of your husband?
My husband's name was Sam. He had a wonderful son. He has 3 grandchildren. My grandchildren. His children. Very nice. All 3 of them went to Solomon Schechter School. This is still called Solomon Schechter School. Okay, this school, they went, all 3 of them. And now, thank God, they're smart. They learned Hebrew and Yiddish, and of course English. And they're very devoted to me. So, I was a very lucky person. The fact is that I lay under the bush at this small age, and the dog didn't bark. I have to say that it's a miracle. And today it's appropriate to light the candles and say a prayer and thank God for the small miracles. And one thing that I remember, that my grandmother's words were, remember, you are a Jewish child. In all her pain and suffering, she remembered that she was a Jewish child for me to remember. Okay, any questions?
How many children did you have?
I had 1,
Oh, thank you.
Philip,
Philip?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
What were the names of your parents?
Alec and Marcia,
Alec and Marcia?
yeah,
Okay.
How do you spell Alec?
A-L-A-X,
During the time of the Nazi occupation,
yeah.
was there ever a time where you lost your faith in God? Or did all of the miracles help you to keep your faith?
I have to say this. When I came to America, I really felt I could never be friends with a non-Jew because of all the things that happened. But next door to me moved in a lady. The building was sold and she bought the property and she moved in. And my father-in-law, who lived with us, came, and I came home from work, and he says to me, you know, somebody brought a bushel of potatoes in Chicago. A bushel of potatoes? Who would have a bushel of potatoes in Chicago? Okay, 2 days later, a basket of tomatoes. What do they think? I'm a charity case? I said to my father-in-law, who was it? No note, no letter. He says, a tall blonde woman. The third or fourth day, I'm coming home from work, and there stands a tall blonde lady, and she says, do I have to bring you a cow to be invited for a cup of coffee? I have to tell you, she's my friend up till now. 37 years, and she had 2 children. I had my son, and they were friends all the time, and I'm friends with her till now.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What do you want the kids in our generation to know about what you went through during the Holocaust?
What I went through, it's unbelievable and unhumanly. Okay? I lost a sister and 2 brothers, twin brothers. But you can't live in the past. You come here in a new country, you have to start a new life and not tell your children the hatred that you experienced, although they know. But they have to. You have to regain your faith in God, and you have to live like a human again. Because what we were treated was inhuman. Animals in America don't get treated like that. I was 88 years old. Thank God you don't have to experience that. What it means to go from door to collect pieces of bread or potatoes or anything to eat for you and your grandmother. The degrading situation of it. So you have to remember one thing. Thank God, I'm even talking about my grandchildren, is 33 and 34, you know, and 28. They're not babies, right? But thank God you come to a house where your parents love you, where there's warm and cold, clothes in the closets, full of frigidors or freezers of food. You cannot imagine what it means just because you're Jewish, that you are to that point degraded or killed. For the simple fact, you didn't do anything wrong, just because you were a Jew. I know it's difficult to imagine, because thank God life is good to you now. But before the Germans, we had the good life too. We had parents, we had houses, and then it turned like this bad. And any of you can imagine at 7, not to have what to eat, to be sick, to be not wanted because you are simply a Jew.
And when were you born?
In 1933,
Where were you born?
Poland.
Oh, okay.
Cover everything for you?
Yes.
Good. And he's been my boyfriend for a long time. But the problem is, he outgrew me.
Rose, thank you very much for allowing our students to interview you. Go ahead.
Rose, were you the only Jewish child in that orphanage in
I
Russia?
think so.
There were no
I
other
don't know.
Jews?
Because nobody had shaven heads, only me.
So since the head of the orphanage didn't treat you right, did the other kids treat you awfully too?
Well, in a way, yes. Because the person that was in charge gave me too many chores that I couldn't finish.
Yeah.
So then I was punished.
All right, thank you so much, you guys.
Okay,
Thank you.
so long.
Thank you.
Are you still my boyfriend?
Yes.
Good.